Sure thing. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our venture investor fireside chat and presentation for this afternoon with Sunil Nagaraj of Ubiquity Ventures. Incredibly excited to have the Lu Idea Lab for Innovation and Entrepreneurship partnering with the Ken Kennedy Institute to help make this talk happen this evening. My name is Kyle Judah. I'm the exec director for the Lilly Lab, the Lu Idea Lab. We're the Center for Entrepreneurship at Rice. Our mission is to help take Rice Ventures from our campus and bring it to the world. So we run and set up a number of courses and workshops, personalized mentorship and support resources for people to explore entrepreneurship and then get the help they need at every step along that journey and smooth that transition from campus to community so that you can go from idea to real world impact or prototype into production. Incredibly excited. This kind of kicks off our venture capital dialogues for this academic year. Happy to pass the mic on over to Angela Wilkins, the exec director of the Ken Kennedy Institute, to introduce our speaker for this afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Kyle. I am so excited that we'll get to work together. Welcome to Rice. I think we're going to have fun. I'm really glad Sunil is here with us today. He is the founder and managing partner of Ubiquity Ventures. He holds an MBA from Harvard Business School, but for me, the Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science from UNC is super cool. When you meet with Sunil, you can detect his technical side immediately, which makes me think that he must be a fantastic investor to work with, that he understands the company on so many levels. Ubiquity Ventures is a seed stage institutional venture capital firm that invests in software beyond the screen, which we'll get to learn a little bit more about today. The companies that Sunil invests in leverage smart hardware and machine intelligence to bring software into the real world. He has lots of very interesting investments, companies like Diligent Robotics, Halter, Jargon, Parallel Domain, to name a few. Before he started Ubiquity Ventures, he spent 6 years as a venture capitalist with Bessemer Venture Partners. And he led a seed round with a little known company called Zapier, which I think is kind of cool. He's also an entrepreneur. He is the founder and CEO of a company called Triangulate. It was a VC-backed company that was an online dating startup that used machine learning and behavioral data. At this point, I'm very excited to hear Sunil's talk, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate it. I'm going to look for a nod that you can hear me okay, and I will flip on my screen as well. Okay, great. Well, it is a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I'm going to kick on my screen share. I am based out in California, in Palo Alto, a venture capitalist, and I'm excited to talk with you. I think we have a nice representation of both business and engineering folks today across the Rice community, and it's an honor to speak with you and share more about how venture capital works and why this area of software to be on the screen is lucrative, exciting, and something I've devoted my life to with regard to my own venture capital firm, and I would encourage more people to dive into this sector. So I'll share my enthusiasm for that. I will, from time to time, go very technical. I think there's some really strong technical nuggets in here, and I think we have a good number of engineering folks. But more broadly, what I hope you take away from today is actually that, that three key elements. First, that software, 2020 style software is completely amazing, that it is moving beyond the screen. It's no longer chained to a computer and a keyboard. And this is a very, very big deal. So with that in mind, I'll tell you about this overarching trend, and then we'll dive into how this is possible. So with Ubiquity Ventures, this is a $75 million venture capital firm based in Palo Alto, California that I run on my own. I've been in venture for 10 years, but 3 under this Ubiquity banner. I focus completely on software beyond the screen. That means that everything I do has some version of this slide. This slide could be in any of the startups that I invest in inside of their pitch deck. The core contention here is that software, including Zoom, that we're all using today, sits on a computer. It's had a very good run so far. But in 2007, with Steve Jobs announcing the iPhone, software moved into our pocket. It moved into a smaller screen. That made it more convenient, more interestingly for venture capitalists, it increased the market size of software. Software could show up in more places. You could bring it with you. You could use it on the go, whether that be deskless workers or ongoing usage like Snapchat or Instagram. This whole new wave of mobile software became a very exciting opportunity for changing the world, creating a lot of money, and drawing in venture capital interest. Now, what I spend a lot of time thinking about with Ubiquity Ventures, the seed-focused VC firm, I'm thinking about what's next. I don't want to invest in what already is. I want to invest in what's next. And for me, this is the most important idea that I can talk to you about today, that software is now in everything, running everywhere, animating our real physical world. And I've given a few examples here, but we'll talk more about what this means. The agenda for today will be that we'll spend about, I think this is my next slide, we'll take some time to talk about sort of where software came from, and then we'll switch gears and talk about how it's moving into the real world. And then at the end, we'll send about 15 minutes for question and answer. So with that in mind, let's dive in. So with regard to software, this is something that I think it's important to look back to the past so that we can make thoughtful predictions about the future. We're making predictions about the future. Partially, it's my job. Partially, it's where you all can, I would encourage you to invest your career, your time, your energy to produce the biggest impact or the biggest payoff or whatever outcome you're seeking. It's often the most exciting to be on that leading edge. And so my contention is, let's look retrospectively for a minute. As I think about retrospective, I told you I live here in Palo Alto in the Bay Area. I've been out here for 11 years. And for most of that time, I've been on the board of the Computer History Museum for 10 years. And at the Computer History Museum, I've come to learn time and time again that the way software looks is very, it morphs every few years. And let me go into a little more detail on that. The reason I bring this up is I find many people, definitely many venture capitalists, are dogmatic. They're very closed-minded in how they think software looks. And I think that can be to someone's detriment. Software changes the way it looks. So let's take a trip down history for a minute, down memory lane. This looks like a silly piece of wood with a bunch of dials on it. It turns out that in 1880, they were counting the U.S. Census. We're doing the census right now. They were using clipboards and pencils, and they did the 1880 census. By like 1888, they were only halfway done. Right? It took a long time to count all these paper cards. So in 1890, they switched systems, and they actually used punch cards. And what that means is it's a card, you poke a hole in it to mark whether you're male or female or your age, whatever the census questions are. And then this system here, I think you can see my cursor, this is a system back at home base where an electrical contact is either made or not made whenever you push the pin through a particular hole. So as a result, this machine on the right side can quickly tabulate where the electrical contacts made and where they weren't. That increments a counter. This system is how they were able to count the 1890 census in like 6 months because they were quickly counting card after card after card. This looks like a rickety old machine, but this is software. It turns out this was made by a company called Calculating, Tabulating, and Recording. Also sounds pretty weird, CTR. A few years later, that company renamed into IBM. So this is IBM's first computer, and this is where it all starts. So even though it feels like hardware today is a little bit different than software, it was actually hardware in the past as well. And that is driven home by another example, 1946, ENIAC, arguably the world's first kind of electronic computer. Each wire here, you know, many VCs, many entrepreneurs I would talk to would say, what is this? It's a black and white photo. There's no software here. It's a bunch of hardware and wires and vacuum tubes. Do you even know what vacuum tubes are? Well, it turns out this is all software. If you wanted to change a variable the same way you might in Python or C++ today, instead of typing on a keyboard, you actually moved a little dial on this ENIAC computer. If you wanted to change control logic, you moved a wire. And so this is still software. Fast forward, it used to be on a floppy disk, eventually CD-ROMs, and this is 2003 for me. So this is where I was in college at the time. Had a full-time summer at Microsoft, and that summer I started to learn about things with how software is deployed. Now we're going to get a little bit into the business aspect of this. Software at Microsoft in 2003, this is really software everywhere. We would build software, we'd design it for about a year, year and a half. That means 18 months. We would do nothing but sketch out how the software should work, write the code, and then we would stop. There was a special word we used called code complete. We wouldn't write any more software. And then for the next 18 months, right, we wrote for 18 months, and then we did nothing but test for 18 months. It sounds crazy in retrospect if you're into software today, but with this 3-year development cycle, we would wrap it up. We would cut the gold master, that means a master CD-ROM. we would release to manufacturing, RTM, and then it would show up on store shelves inside of boxes like this. And that was how software worked. If it's not obvious, software used to be a very delicate thing that no one could touch, and you wanted to make sure it didn't break, right? You were very careful about it. And as a result, it had this sort of monolithic development process. Licenses, information superhighway. As software started to shift into the internet, you started to see websites. Now, it's kind of fun to think that the bottom right is Netflix's first web page, and the top left is Google's first web page. This is software. And here we started to see this first notion that, in a funny way, everyone can kind of create software. I think, Angela, you mentioned Zapier. Zapier makes you happier. They're now a very large, successful company that lets anyone connect different APIs. But this notion of sort of bottoms-up software generation started with things like GeoCities, which is what's in the middle here. It's where I made my first web page. Yahoo eventually bought GeoCities, and then it disappeared. But this notion that software was, again, wires, and then it was floppy disks and CD-ROMs, and then it was in the web. And today, here's Tim Cook. I think about a year ago, I got to attend this WWDC, and my best friend works at Apple, so he got me almost a front row seat. It was epic. But here, Tim Cook, leader of the world's most valuable company, is talking about software as apps. Everything's an app. If it's not an app, it's not software. And so what I hope this conveys here is that software, in each moment in time, everyone in that time slot thinks of software in one way, right? If it doesn't have a vacuum tube, it's not software. If it doesn't come on a CD-ROM, it's not software. And so what we need to think about is where is it going next, and what can we bring forward, and what should we leave behind as we think about where to invest in software beyond the screen. So as an engineer, I'll weave in parts of my background. I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina. I attended UNC Chapel Hill and studied computer science. I was there 2000 to 2004. During that period of time and for a few years afterwards, I was a pretty heavy coder. And so I noticed certain things along the way about this software development toolset. I want to go into them. And where this is going is we're going to see that we can bring some of these ideas forward into software beyond the screen. So as we look at the software development toolset, there are a few key elements that we'll touch on. First is that software developers, engineers, always try to reuse as much as possible. There's almost this ethos of careful laziness. You should never have to repeat yourself. DRY is a common expression. Do not repeat yourself. So you want to build on top of others' work wherever possible. This is not plagiarism. This is leveraging thoughtful work from other people as much as possible. So we'll talk about this. Abstraction is another key idea, that it is really hard to write code that works all the way down to the ones and zeros, the electrons flying around a computer. So you use someone for a part of your technical stack. You use something else. So you build your final application on a set of different tools, and you abstract away the different complexities. Finally, Agile. This is the opposite of Microsoft in 2003. Today, Microsoft's a pretty agile company, but in 2003, I said it took 3 years to roll out one version of Microsoft Office, and then another 3 years. Today, as you may or may not know, Gmail or Facebook, when you log in, every time you log in, it's probably a little bit different. They're pushing code many, many times a day, and there's this agility that is a critical part of it. So what I'll do is I'll go into each of these three elements a little more deeply. So we'll start with reuse. This is clearly an Isaac Newton quote. If I can see far, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants. Very old quote, but still a core concept in software development today. As opposed to building everything from scratch, which I was alluding to is the wrong way, there's an ethos in engineering. Even when I was writing code in high school in BASIC, as soon as you write code, I used to write a little snippet of code to be able to center text on the screen. If I had to center something later in my program, in my code, I would take that snippet of code, put it into a function, and then call that function each time I need to center something. So that's what refactoring is. It's consolidating your code so it's a little bit cleaner. And it's the first inkling of code reuse, is because once you take commonly used snippets of code and put them into a function, maybe you could share that function with a friend. And this is where code snippets, if you look at Stack Overflow or GitHub, this is where the idea of a header file in C++ or an include comes into play, but you're starting to borrow as much work as possible along the way, properly licensed and the like. You even have, I used to be a big Perl coder. So the Comprehensive Perl Archive Network, CPAN, NPM was a Bessemer investment. I was a Bessemer for 6 years before starting Ubiquity. There's this notion of just carefully and thoughtfully and efficiently collaborating as quickly as possible. And in particular, we'll get to this with abstraction. You want it to be in a way that I know exactly what's there and what isn't there. So we'll talk about that abstraction idea. And so Auth0 was a startup that I seeded when I was at Bessemer. Now the company's worth over $2 billion. It's a developer tool for login and identity. So if you're building an application, and I hope many of you are, you don't have to work on the username, password, accepting Facebook login, accepting Windows Active Directory login. You can hand that off to Auth0. And as a result, you get to focus on what you do best because you're standing on the shoulders of giants and reusing things. The second element of our three-part software development toolkit is abstraction. Again, it has this hint of thoughtful laziness. You know, I don't want to worry about, I just want to worry on what I'm good at. And I think a great example of this is this OSI model. If anyone's into networking, you'll recognize this. And even if you're not, you'll recognize some of these words. Right now, we're using Zoom. Zoom is an application. It's a program we all installed on our computers. It's at the application layer. Now, what Zoom does is Zoom doesn't know whether you're on wireless or on a wired network, or if you're on cellular. Zoom doesn't care if you really care that much if you're on a Mac or a PC. So Zoom is able to do what it does, and then it hands its data, its packets, down to a different transport layer. That could be TCP. TCP hands that network, that data down once it wraps it to a lower level network that can be IP. So the idea is at each level, there's this idea of an envelope. You take your payload, you put it in an envelope and give it to someone else. Someone else puts it in a bigger envelope and gives it to someone else. And as a result, every layer doesn't even need to know what the other layer is doing. Zoom doesn't need to know whether I'm on a cable modem or DSL. And so as a result, Zoom puts all its data into bigger and bigger envelopes as it goes down the stack. It goes over the public internet. And then on your side, it's opening up each envelope and then handing it back to Zoom on your end. This notion of abstraction is central to how we've been able to achieve this much progress. And it's not something that was very common prior to the advent of software. In order for this to work, I've alluded to this, but you need to have a well-specified envelope, a well-specified SDK, a well-specified header file that says, if you give me this, here's what I promise I will do, right? And once you have that contract, it's actually a pretty specific contract, often specified in XML or YAML or something else, but it says, give me exactly, we have a contract with the Postal Service. If you put the exact street address and use something they made up called a zip code, we promise we will get it there within a certain amount of time. And if we don't, we'll send it back to you. That's their promise. So there's already the social contract, and you don't have to worry about how to get something across the country. And this is the same idea with software modules and components. It's because of this strongly typed contract that you're able to encourage more collaboration. Imagine if you let me use your phone, I got to find the right app in the right place. It's a big mess. But if I know that your phone is always set up this way, I can use your phone. And that's a core part of this. I won't go into it, but microservices are the next level of this, where you have live modules that allow an organization to develop independent pieces more quickly in different languages, but they have a tight social contract. The final piece here of the software development toolkit, I've talked so far about reuse. I've talked about well, let's just jump there for a second. We've talked so far about reuse, abstraction, and now the final piece we'll talk about is agility. Again, we're trying to decide which of these elements to bring forward into the software beyond the screen idea. So with regard to agility, it's a funny idea. Being agile means, let's see, to start something, to start a company, you probably need to say, I'm going to ignore everybody that says this is a good or bad idea. I'm just going to go off and do it. You have to be confident. You have to be bold. And then at the same moment, you have to have this bullet here. You also have to say, I don't know anything, right? You have to say, I know everything, I don't know anything. And that's also, that's with regard to entrepreneurship. That's also at the essence of Agile with regard to software development. Instead of saying, I know the problem up front, you say, I know very, very little up front. I'm going to test and iterate the same way that you might make a hypothesis, conduct the experiment according to protocol, and gather your insights, and then prove or disprove your hypothesis up front. The same idea is true with Agile. Every piece of work, maybe folks on the call will know Scrum and setting up Kanban boards and stuff like that. Every piece of work would be tied to an experiment you're trying to run so that you can test, measure, improve. Another interesting way to look at this same idea of dismissing the notion you know things up front is to think about it visually. So on the x-axis is time. So let's talk about a software development project. You need to make a new application, or you need to make a system for a rice department. When I was an undergrad, I coded for the university quite a bit. So you're tasked with a new project. Over time, the amount you know about that project is only going to grow. right? As you get to know that client or as you get to know the problem set, you will learn more and more and more. But in traditional software development, you have to make different decisions. And it turns out you have to make the most important decisions at the beginning. So this gap here, again, hopefully you can see my cursor, this gap sucks, right? Like you have to make the most important decisions when you know the least. And that's traditional software development. Another description of this would be waterfall software development. Now, in stark contrast to this, Agile does something totally amazing to this problem. It says, instead of having to decide at the very beginning what your technology stack is, who your teammates are, what your features are, how long it's going to be, lock in everything up front. Think about Microsoft in 2003, right? Having to lock in all your decisions at the very beginning. It says, you know what? Don't worry about it. Just get started. Just start moving bit by bit by bit and continually course correct. So this dotted line is a really big deal, that you get to change how important your decisions are. At the very beginning of your journey, you can make very, very unimportant decisions. And later, if you want to change your mind, you can change your mind very easily with these nimble systems and nimble processes where you're not doing 18-month development cycles, you're doing 2-week development cycles. As you gather more information, you can throw away and course correct. And so this, there's a few other elements to this, but this is a critical piece of how software has really come into its own renaissance in the last maybe 10 years through the advent of several tools, cloud hosting, stage deployment, kind of a neat idea. If you're dabbling, right, like Microsoft would make it perfect for 18 months and then test it for 18 months and then put it on CD-ROM. So it better be perfect. But if you're dabbling here, stage deployment becomes a really important tool. Facebook or Google or Gmail, when they think of a new feature, they might think of a new feature on a Monday. They might build it by Friday. Now, maybe it's safe, maybe it's not, but there's a lot riding on it. It's not breaking the whole system. So what they'll do is they'll set it up so that they can deploy it. They can make it available, that new feature, to 0.1% of their users. And then they watch how it goes for a week or a day. And then if they like that, they make it available to 1% of their users. And then if they like it, they make it available to 50%. So they can slowly roll this out to more and more of their users to make sure it's bug-free, to catch unintended consequences early, and the like. So this notion, there's a great company called LaunchDarkly that's a leader here in stage deployment. So to tie these together, how I think about startups, utilizing some of these ideas, especially with regard to Agile, I think about startup founders. And again, I've been in venture capital 10 years and 2 years as a venture founder, venture-backed startup CEO before that. I think about entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial journey as being in a forest, a very big forest. You're in the middle. You're lost. You're lost in a forest, and you want to get out. You want to get back to your cabin deep in a forest. So you can you're stuck in the middle, and you can have this idea that you know the right way to get out, right? And that is one way that startups can work, is that you just know I'm Steve Jobs or someone else super bold that can just make a prediction, and I know this is the right way, and somehow they get it right once in a while. That's like 0.1% of founders. 99% of the time, you're stuck and you're kind of feeling around in the darkness. You're trying to tell where to go. And now, the idea here is that if you have a friend who calls you every day, once a day, and they say, Sunil, you're in the forest. You know what? Today, you're getting a little warmer. You're heading the right direction. That's helpful, right? It's way better than not having a friend. So looking at signals and instrumentation and course correcting is helpful. But once a day, it's still going to take a long time to get back to your cabin. If you can instead have a friend call you every hour or call you every minute or just stay on the phone with you and talk to you every second. No, this way, hot, cold, you're going to find your way very, very quickly out of this forest, which is to say, on the broader startup picture, you can establish product market fit much more quickly if you incorporate the software development tool set, especially around Agile. And I think that's an important piece of the puzzle. So that is the first part of this talk about sort of where software comes from and what it is underneath the hood. In terms of what it applies, what it implies for software business, how does software help software businesses? And then we're going to turn over and talk about Ubiquity's focus and how these characteristics play. With regard to software businesses, there's a lot of surprising things. I think it's 2020. Most of the stuff I see on here won't be that surprising, but if it was 5 years ago, all this would be crazy. So you can buy something and it will get better. Now I have let's see if it's going to work here. I have a pen. I bought this once. It's never getting better. I can have a Rolex, a fancy watch. It's never getting better. In fact, it's only getting worse. But today, when you buy a piece of software, think about buying Angry Birds or think about getting Microsoft Office or Gmail, it's going to continually getting better, even though you pay for it once. And sometimes it is paying for it just once. With iPhones that you can buy for $600, I think iOS 14 got released just a few days ago. The whole way your phone works is not only different, but better. And somehow you got that for free, sort of. There are other tools. I use Photoshop all the time. And it used to be that you buy Photoshop in a box for $500. Now I think I pay $10 a month to be part of Adobe Photoshop Creative Cloud. It's still a downloadable 2 gig installed piece of software, but I can pay for it as I use it. This has a major implication, which let's see if I put it on here. It has a major implication, which is that I can stop paying for Photoshop if I don't like it, right? In the past, I would have to see a commercial, look at the box, the cardboard box of Photoshop, and look at the back and the screenshots and be like, oh, that sounds good, I'll buy that. If I didn't like it, I'm out $500. Today, I can slowly meter out cash payments as a customer. I can send them $10, see if I like it. It's almost like a free trial, though not quite. I'm still getting a $500 piece of software, but I'm paying for it slowly over time. What this does then is it creates a strong incentive for Adobe Photoshop to work harder. This is, let's see here, if I have it. Do I have, perfect, at the very bottom. It actually creates more aligned interest. So when I am paying for something slowly, they're going to want to keep me happy. They're going to want to educate me on how to use it. They're going to want to stay in touch with me. They're going to want to roll out new features that are thoughtful. Like, this is honestly, just a more beautiful world. A much better way for the world to work is that somebody selling me something cares whether I use it. I mean, it sounds weird, but a few years ago, if someone sold me something, a piece of software 10 years ago, they didn't really care if I used it or not. They got away with it. They took the $100 and could run. Now we're tying our fates together in a very real way. That's in terms of me as a consumer. In terms of developers, it turns out if you're in the public stocks or later stage companies, you talk about ARR, annual recurring revenue. What this means is that startups and developers now have a stronger sense of how much cash they're going to get every month. In the past, if they just sold Photoshop once for $500, they're crossing their fingers hoping somebody buys it next month, but they have no idea. Now with this $10 a month income stream, times a certain number of pretty likely to recur customers, you have ongoing recurring revenue, ARR, and in public markets and in private markets, annual recurring revenue, ARR, is assigned a much higher valuation multiple. So the companies are worth more when they have the same amount of annual recurring revenue as they would have if they had standard one-time revenue. Twitch was an investment that I was a key part of when I was at Bessemer. I handed them their term sheet at their Series B. About 2 years later, they sold it for $1 billion to Amazon. Now, what's behind this is what's on this slide. It doesn't sound like it because Twitch is a place to go watch other people play video games. But when we made the investment in Twitch, and actually you can go to, if you Google Bessemer Twitch, I think that they just posted the memo, the investment memo. It's the full unadulterated memo. It's pretty interesting. But you can read in there that we wrote that video games were switching from pay up front to pay as you play, or free to play. So as a result, video game developers were now suddenly motivated to get you to continue using their game. So Twitch had a totally new benefit now, because for the first time, you wanted people to continue playing your game. This is a game like League of Legends from Riot Games. So Twitch came out, and they were a way to, you could say, a place to watch people play video games, but more interestingly, it was a way to re-engage your users of your application, your users of your game. So Twitch made you want to get to level 25 of that game because you were watching what it looks like in level 25. This notion of streamers and watching advanced gameplay was a great re-engagement mechanism to drive additional gameplay. 10 years ago, no one cared about additional gameplay from business perspective. Today, we do care about additional gameplay because there's incremental revenue attached with additional gameplay in a recurring revenue, cloud delivered, in-app purchases world. So that is the big chunk of our talk today. I'll briefly touch on what this means for software beyond the screen, right? And I'm using software beyond the screen. There's a strong element here, if it's not obvious from my previous talk of software's journey through time, that it will look totally different than software, but it still has the same thing. It can look it can look, I mean, this is not a totally ridiculous example, but it can look like a pen, right? There is a world in which we say this is software, right? I mean, I have these AirPods in my ear. They're headphones, but they are software. And this is what I think the massive opportunity is. And we can't get lost by thinking, oh, that's hardware, it's physical. It's not the same as software, right? It is actually pretty darn similar. We've talked about this transition. We've talked about the software development toolset, but the big idea here is that the software development toolset is now the hardware development toolset. Even more, I mean, and I truly believe this, even bigger than that is the way we build software, we can now verbatim use it to build the real world. That's probably the biggest idea I'll leave you with today, and it's not the end of our talk, but this is why I named my VC firm Ubiquity Ventures, is that we can code the real world. We can turn real world physical problems into software problems. And as soon as we move something into the software domain, we're really good at building it quickly. We have all these tools, OSI layer, things like that, Agile, that make it go super quick. So powerful tools can now enable great software. They can great hardware. They can also enable real physical world experiences. So as I think about it, if you see something in the real world, thinking if we should bring up an example. Well, we'll go into the framework here to how to think about it, and then I'll bring up a few examples from my portfolio. What you want to know is when you look at something and you see, let's say, a smart coffee mug, right? There's a few companies now that make a coffee mug that is smart. It heats up. You can ask, so some people would be like, yeah, that's smart hardware. I saw it on Kickstarter. It's $80. It seems expensive, and it does something more than a normal coffee mug. I would completely disagree. It's not smart hardware, and it's because I would use this framework. First and foremost, it's going to repeat a lot of what we said, but does it follow this pattern of test, measure, modify? Is this thing getting better and better over time? Is it able to see how you're using the product and use that to reprioritize their development roadmap and push out new updates? Sometimes I say that smart hardware has settings, analytics, and updates, and this creates a virtuous loop of improvement. I think I say it right here, perfect. So this is an important piece of the virtuous loop of improvement that powers software and also powers software beyond the screen. We probably know Zoom, you get updates on Zoom, and Zoom gets better, and it's because they're going through exactly this set of tools. Zoom knows which buttons are clicking. They hopefully use it for good, not evil. That goes into a database. Their product managers, their PMs, crunch that data to figure out where should we invest time, what should we make. It looks like everyone's clicking on this button because they're frustrated. How do we improve that experience? And they use that to push out a new software update. And so this is the central question as you look at sort of new opportunities is, does it have settings, analytics, and updates? So now, as I start to conclude here, I want to drive all this home with a few examples from my portfolio. And please go ahead and be thinking of questions that you'd like to ask. In about 5 or 7 minutes, we'll open up for Q&A. So some of the examples, I'll bring up a Texas company actually, but I'll start with Halter. Halter is in the Ubiquity Ventures portfolio, Diligence in the Ubiquity Ventures portfolio. I'm part of the board of both of those companies. And in the past, while I was at Bessemer, I invested in Rocket Lab and was part of the board there. So we'll talk about 3 examples, and we'll hopefully try to use this framework. If you hadn't attended this talk, I suspect you might have said all 3 companies. You might have said Halter is a cow company, Diligent is a robot company, Rocket Lab is a rocket company. But hopefully after today and after we dive into this, you'll say all 3 are software companies. This is the big delta here. So let me actually start with Halter. I believe that you can see my screen if I'm doing this right. So Halter is a company that actually has technology for dairy cows. I wanted to pull up a video, and let's see if this plays all right for everyone to see here. So Halter has this smart hardware collar you can see here. This looks like hardware, right? I even just said, physical collar. What it is it's a software-powered, it's a place for software to run in the real world. This goes around the neck of a dairy cow. When you put software onto the neck of a dairy cow, you turn dairy farming, this is cows on a big field where you milk them for milk, you turn that into a software problem. As we watch more of this video, we can see a little bit more what that means. So what you'll see is that these cows, they say you can create the autonomous farm. With your phone, you can move your finger on your phone and your cows move in the real world. Mind-blowing technology. This is accomplished with sound and vibration that comes from the smart collar. But now you're able to address each cow directly. You're able to draw digital fences. You can walk around your farm or just standing in your house, draw a digital fence and all the cows will stay inside of that fence. This is a little bit interesting. What's even more interesting now is, this is just a visualization of how this digital farm works. What's even more interesting though is that with your phone, you can actually shift your herd. So you can push a button and what it'll do is it will talk to each collar and then it'll convince each cow, it'll nudge them using sound and vibration to move into the next area that they're supposed to move for. Sometimes we call these cowgorithms jokingly, but this idea of digital shepherding, you're now able to control where your cows are grazing. You're able to monitor their health, figure out which cow is in heat, ready to be inseminated, and even determine which cows are the hungriest because you can tell how much each cow is eaten. You can precisely transfer one cow from one paddock, one part of land to another part of land. So a very interesting rule is code, a snippet of code is you could say every day at noon, check to see which cow is the hungriest and send just that cow to the next patch of grass first. I want my hungriest cows to have first dibs on the food. And that's probably the way the world should work. And we could never do that without software. Now that we've turned dairy farming into a software problem with settings, analytics, and updates, we now have the ability to, and this is a bit of an example of how dairy farmers can now enjoy their lives more because now they're not stuck on the dairy farm, chained to the dairy farm all day. So that's the first example that I will talk through. Let's switch gears and talk about a second example. So Rocket Lab. Rocket Lab is a company that launches satellites to space. That sounds like the least software thing you can imagine. Now, it turns out this is probably one of the biggest reasons I decided to leave Bessemer and start my own VC firm to focus on software beyond the screen. It's because of these this little thing here. So I think we have, again, a few folks who are engineering or deeply interested in engineering. So a quick detour on how rockets work. Well, it turns out a rocket, which might be 100 feet tall, all the complexity of a rocket is in the very bottom, just in the engine. A lot of the complexity of an engine, right? And an engine's job is to take propellant, make it explode in one direction so you go the other direction. A lot of the complexity in the engine, what you see here is one of Rocket Lab's engines. A lot of the complexity of an engine is something called a turbopump. Turbopump does what you think it sounds like, what it sounds like. It pumps something really quickly. What does it pump? Well, it pumps the propellant. The propellant is kerosene and oxygen. You got to pump both of those really quickly into the engine, make it explode, and you go the other direction. You take off. Every other rocket that's ever taken off has a mechanical turbopump. This is a turbopump where it actually it lights a little rocket inside of the turbopump, a little engine explosion that turns a turbine, and that pumps the fuel. Now, it's not important the details of that. What is important is that this is a physical device. If you wanted to change it, improve it, settings, analytics, updates, if you wanted to get better, you have to take the whole engine apart, go to a metal shop, bend a new piece of steel, put the whole thing back together, put it on a pad, and test it out. That can take weeks or months, kind of like my 3-year Microsoft example, that you're constantly, you have a slow, hampered down innovation process because of your feedback loop. Rocket Lab has the world's first and only electric turbopumps. So instead of a mechanical turbopump, where it is a combustion turning a turbine that's pumping the fuel, we have an electric motor pumping the fuel. For most people, again, if you hadn't attended this talk, you'd be like, oh, that's cool. But now I hope you see where this is going. We have code that changes the way our turbopump works. The same way, it's identical to the way that Tesla can change how their Model S can go 0 to 60 in 3 seconds or 2.8 seconds or 2.6 seconds with an over-the-air update. When we tested this rocket engine, and even to this day, we're able to go to a computer, change a variable in C++, push the update even over the air, and this rocket will operate differently, right? For example, the torque curve, or how quickly it starts to release fuel, or how powerful the fuel injection is, so to speak. And so this is truly a software-powered rocket to its core. As a result, some rocket companies may spend $10 billion to create a new rocket that goes to orbit. Rocket Lab spent between 100 times and 1,000 times less money to get to orbit, and that's not an exaggeration. This is the power of software beyond the screen. Instead of spending 10 billion to do something, you could spend 100 million or 10 million, because we've turned it into a software problem. The last example I'll bring up, and then we'll talk about some fun implications of this, is Diligent Robotics, a fellow Texas company. They're based in Austin. Diligent Robotics is able to turn hospital logistics into a software problem. So they do this with their robot, their social robot called Moxie. What you'll see is that Moxie is a mobile robot. It's a mobile manipulation robot. It has a hand on the end of it, and it's able to pick things up autonomously, take them somewhere else. So at the moment, they're live in 2 hospitals in Texas where they're doing supply sample delivery, restocking, and even medical lab delivery and pharmaceutical delivery. So these different tasks around a hospital, they're thoughtfully automating different tasks so that the actual human clinical staff can focus more on patient care. There are these kind of nuanced tasks that Moxie, the robot, can handle. And again, this is a software-powered thing where it's understanding the real world, perceiving, it's able to grasp, drop things off, and it's iterating at the pace of software, hence this notion of software beyond the screen. So as I start to conclude, let me bring up a few fun examples, a few fun implications of what we're talking about. These are not portfolio companies, just interesting things. When you really embrace software beyond the screen, you start to see things like this. This is from 3 years ago. But the idea here is, let's see if that stops. Yeah, the idea here is that people bought Teslas of different size fuel tanks, different size battery packs, different size fuel tanks. There was a hurricane coming towards Florida. Tesla headquarters, they decided, you know what? We're just going to increase everyone's fuel tank during this disaster. It's a crazy idea, right? It's like, I mean, I have this bottle of Diet Coke here. If I was in a super thirsty, Coke would just increase all the size of the bottle over the air immediately. And this is tied to another element here. Is Tesla technically had 3 models of Teslas, Model S. They had the Model S 40, 60, 80, but they didn't really have a 60. I mean, they didn't really have a 40. They just had a 60, and they software limited how much energy you could use down to 40 kilowatt hours. When this happened, they pushed a software update and removed that software limitation. And so this is a new idea that there will be dark sensors. There'll be extra stuff in the things you buy that won't be utilized, maybe ever, right? Because they're so cheap, they might put an extra 10-cent battery or a 10-cent gyroscope or IMU, inertial measurement unit, in there. They might decide in the future they want to use it. They may charge more if you want to use it. One of my Ubiquity extended team members has written code that's running on the Mars Curiosity rover right now. I have an extended team of 50 experts on machine learning and smart hardware that help me to make smart investments. And she wrote code that runs on the Mars rover. The Mars, as you know, it can be between 8 and 25 minutes light travel time. So you don't want to have interactive control of the rover, because it would be like move it forward a step and you got to wait 20 minutes and you go say move forward another step. So it operates relatively autonomously. So Hannah Kerner is her name. She wrote code that looks for anomalies on Mars by using an autoencoder within machine learning and doing a diff between an inbound image and sort of the recreation representation to say, you know what, this looks like something I've never seen before. So the rover can decide where to spend time, where to take more pictures, where to navigate to based on what's interesting. Again, this is software beyond the screen. The rovers that we have now, this is now standard practice. When they launch, this is a little bit of an exaggeration, but it'll drive home the point. They launch without software. They launch with like an empty brain. It takes 9 months to get to Mars with this home and transfer orbit thing. And so during those 9 months, we can keep working. It's kind of like cramming for a test, right? You know the teacher's going to be a few minutes late, so you keep cramming. So while the rover is already off in space, launched in a rocket, floating through space, the NASA and JPL engineers are continuing to code. And I don't know, a month before it's about to land, they over the air beam the code up to the rover while it's in space. It's kind of like stage deployment. It's late deployment. It's just in time running of software, but it's a really big idea. I won't belabor this point, but we got to worry about the downsides. This is a blue screen of death from Windows, but what happens when you have a blue screen of death on a Tesla or other things? And we've seen a few kind of terrible things already occur there. It's now coming to the point where software beyond the screen is not even just reaching parity with the real world, it's exceeding the real world. I have a nice SLR, a single lens reflex camera, but it turns out my iPhone 11 Max Pro takes better photos in many instances. And it's not because it has better hardware. It doesn't have a better lens. It has a way worse CCD inside. What it has is the ability to run software on top of it, this notion of computational photography, especially I think Android, the Google team at Android has been pushing hard on night sight. So now they can take photos in almost total blackness. And it's not because they stack imagery like CCD stacking and noise reduction. It's actually that they apply machine learning to kind of recognize what might be in the photo. It's a little bit of what our brains do, but this is actually resulting in output that's better than even the best hardware could produce is if you use software. Another downside, I talked about the blue screen of death. Probably know how Boeing killed 400 people with a terribly designed plane. In particular, it was because they had this MCAS system, which was a software update to their airplane in order to keep it competitive with Airbus. And as a result, they changed how the stick responded. And when pilots thought something was happening, they weren't controlling what they thought they were controlling. And Boeing never told the pilots this. As a result, there were these stalls and people dying along the way. So it was this software abstraction layer that Boeing inserted without fully vetting in a rush to stay competitive. And this is yet another implication of what happens with software beyond the screen. I will pause here. I hope I've communicated both my passion and my future vision for software moving beyond the screen, and I've communicated why I think that this is important for the world, lucrative for you, lucrative for venture capitalists, and sort of the future of where things are going as it rests on this notion of more of the real world being designed with software, more of the real world turning into a software problem. So I put my email address on here, and we'll take questions in a second. I put my email address on my Twitter here. I have a lot more on my blog, which is just blog.ubiquity.vc. So I'd encourage you, I point you to either of those if you wanted to learn more. But with that, I think maybe Angela, you'll help guide us through some questions.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that talk. That was really awesome. I'm sure we'd all be clapping if, Zoom. Okay, so before I get to the questions, and this is kind of like just a standard question right now that you're probably receiving is, how has COVID changed the way you look at things? Because I would assume that your investment thesis has become even more important. And you're seeing the profile of technology needs kind of shift a little bit. like, for example, robots.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think we now all see why robots would be really useful in a hospital.
Yeah. That's a great question. So the impact of COVID on what I do, I think is extremely positive with regard to the technologies. COVID is a horrible thing. We should all take it, incredibly seriously. Killed 200,000 Americans, unfortunately. What it has done, though, is remove some otherwise substantive obstacles to the adoption of technology. For example, one of my companies, Esper, they make software that allows more kiosks and self-service tablets to be out in the real world. Think about when you go to a restaurant or when you go to the airport to check in. It used to be that you check in with a person. Many airports, it's relatively common now to check in at a kiosk. Esper is a software layer, is an Android operating system layer that allows more enterprise developers to put their apps into the field. That is how Esper would describe themselves in the past. Now it really is about allowing more customer interactions to be self-service, right? This word self-service is now, has been brought into focus with COVID. That this is true for myself. I would much rather touch a screen than talk face-to-face with the cashier, just at this moment, until things are a little clearer about the risk levels and things like that. And that has been a major accelerant, whereas in the past, maybe a business owner would say, I'm not really ready, I don't really understand kiosks, now it's a must. And that's applied to that business. ThruWave is a company that I've invested in. It's based in Seattle. ThruWave lets e-commerce and supply chain and logistics companies use millimeter waves to see through walls and boxes. Millimeter waves, 50 gigahertz, they are human safe, but they penetrate through everything but steel, and you get a three-dimensional volumetric picture of what's inside a box. ThruWave.com has a great demo. ThruWave has seen a massive increase in business as e-commerce companies have seen a massive jump. They grew 100% in a quarter, and in turn, they also want to now have better visibility of their supply chain, do damage detection, fill fraction, things like that. So it has, people have, I think, famously said technology has jumped by a decade in just a quarter, right? 10 years of technology adoption in just 10 weeks. And I think that is a trend we'll see more of for a little while here. And I think to the extent Software Beyond the Screen is about robotics, about automation, about self-serve, about more digitization of the real world that has been a tailwind for technology adoption, but still terrible for the broader population.
Yeah, no, definitely terrible for the broader, but at the same time, a lot of this technology can help the situation. So it's, probably a great time to feel like, it's like, see, this is useful.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with you. I'm still a little shell-shocked. Diligent Robotics, Moxie, the robot in the hospital, it was great news. They were featured on CBS Evening News, actually, just about 2 weeks ago. So I took the clip and I put it on Facebook, and I promoted it with advertisements just to get more attention to my portfolio company. I love for them to be highlighted, and the quality of the comments below were just terrifying about how the state of the pushback, not on technology, but also on COVID. So I'm not sure about the broader state of things, but I know that this is helpful for the outside the hospital population, and at least one of my companies is helping the inside the hospital population, even against some people's best wishes against it. So it's a funny thing right now.
You talked about your company Halter, and just because I really enjoyed hearing about how the other companies, how you were how they were seeing opportunities to repurpose their technology in other places. Halter, where do you see that going? Because it seems like there's very many interesting use cases there.
It's a great question. So I will say Halter has its hands full with the dairy market. So they're based in New Zealand. They, in many ways, they spun out of Rocket Lab. So the CEO of Rocket Lab, Peter Beck, he's also on the board of Halter. The CEO of Halter, he's a former Rocket Lab employee. So they're based in New Zealand. New Zealand's biggest export is dairy milk. Just in New Zealand, we believe this could be a $500 million or $1 billion ARR business, just New Zealand dairy cows,
Wow.
$500 million of annual recurring revenue.
That's huge.
The way that we price them, the number of cows. Yeah. And I think that's not a small point with regard to software beyond the screen. Very often, software beyond the screen companies have shockingly large market sizes because these were areas of the world that never had software. So no one put them in a Gartner report in the past, right? I'm sure there's a Gartner report about the size of CRM software or the size of manufacturing software, but the size of cow software, nothing, right? And it's not that it couldn't have been useful. It's just that you needed a little bit of the interface, right? The physical collar. Yeah. But back to your question, we do think that it should be useful outside of New Zealand. It's not useful for factory farming. It is useful for pasture farming of cows. It should be useful for other animals. I suspect everyone always makes this joke when I talk with them. Everyone says, hey, could I use it on my kids? So I don't think that's on the roadmap to keep kids in line, but it is this notion of sort of smart hardware does seem to captivate the mind as it relates to managing things in the real world.
So I'll now jump to everybody else's questions. Do you approach the development process differently for the software in regulated domains, such as medical and healthcare?
Yeah, that's a really great question. The short answer is probably not. And that's like a dangerous answer, right? Like, we're dealing with people's lives. How can you be, Mark Zuckerberg's famous quote, move fast and break things? I would say that we are improving our Q&A regression testing regime, our abstraction, our robustness of technical stacks at such a pace that the regulatory regimes are changing so quickly, and they're forced to change when the value is like 10x. So if there's a 10x medical solution that's that much better, the regime will be forced to change. And an example of that I know a little better is in the space segment. Elon Musk, as evidenced by the number of Teslas that crash, is not the most careful person with regard to managing Teslas and autopilot code, managing the perception, the pace that they roll out stuff. Having had I no longer do, but having had a Tesla in the past, like, they are very buggy. The same person is putting humans into space, right? And they did this a few weeks ago on the Demo 2 mission, the dads going up to ISS. And I think in that case, like, SpaceX pushed the limit on the pace of software development, right? They're a little bit of a software beyond the screen company, and I'm certain that NASA fell in line with that, right? When the alternative, when the product or service being offered is so much more valuable, I do suspect, I don't know, I do suspect that the regulatory regime may shift if the value is that much more demonstrable. This notion of 18 months of Microsoft's testing cycle has collapsed completely. Microsoft has better ways to do that now, and I think that'll apply to other industries. But please don't take any of this as concrete regulatory advice. It's just that I think if you can push the value enough and get folks comfortable with it, with your different way of doing things, you often can change the way they measure you.
No, that's an interesting point, because NASA has a lot more people that they have to answer for than a company. So they have different roles. And plus NASA has to often change everything every 8 years. So it's hard for them to make progress some days. Next question. If we're more involved with, currently more geared towards the business side of things rather than software, would you recommend trying to learn as much as we can about software, or be involved with software ourselves? For example, study economics and read and try to understand computer science on our own, or should you actually be taking the classes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was at Harvard doing business school from 2007 to 2009. So I graduated in 2009. And while I was there, everyone would ask a very similar question. The folks who were not coders, who wanted to play in the role in the tech industry, should we sign up for a computer science class across the river at Harvard College? There are many different answers to this. The one that I'm current, and I may change my mind about this, but at the moment, I think that there is a baseline familiarity with software that I think every American should have, like every single one. And I have a 4-year-old daughter. I'm pushing to make sure she has that baseline of knowing what a function is, knowing what a variable is, knowing what an API is, being conversant in these technologies. What is AWS? What does it mean to scale infrastructure? Sorry for the background noise. I think it'll go away in just a second. What does it mean to scale infrastructure? So I would encourage folks to spend as much time as possible understanding those core ideas. Let's see, I think it's about to go away. Perfect. So that does not mean learning to code or spending time in a computer science class. I think that could be fun, but the goal of like writing your own code for your own production application, I think is a misplaced one, most likely. I mean, the way that you can find development help on things like Odesk or Elance or finding a technical co-founder. At the same time, though, I think it is really useful to have an intimate familiarity of what does it mean when people say developing on Ruby on Rails versus Python? Just the implications. What does it mean when, what is the difference at a high level between writing something for Android and writing something for iOS? I don't think it demands that you learn how to code, but it does demand that you're technically conversant in these topics. I think there are ways to do that. I think YouTube, one of the blog, I don't know if I can put stuff on the chat. Can I put stuff on the chat? Yeah. I probably can. Okay. So I'll put it on the chat here. So one of the things I wrote, a blog post, I have a pretty active blog. I wrote a post called Staying Nerdy During a Pandemic. And it's how I'm staying nerdy during a pandemic. And one of the ways is with lots of technical YouTube videos. So there's some great YouTube videos there. The first one I linked to is my favorite one for a 20-minute crash course in exactly how machine learning works. I think it's somewhere between surprising and shocking how many people invest in machine learning companies and have no idea how it actually works. I mean, the edges and the neurons and the activations and the sigmoid, but a 20-minute crash course on that. And so I think that is the kind of depth that I would encourage people to have on coding as well as on the technical topics where they're going to poke into.
Yeah, I was going to ask that as a second question, because right now, whatever you want to call it, data science, machine learning, AI, it's like at the end of the day, everybody's going to need to know a little bit just so that they converse in an intellectual way, because it's going to be everywhere just the same way software is everywhere.
Yeah.
Let me see, we have another question. Let me see. And by the way, if people have more questions, stick it in the QA or in the chat box. As a HashiCorp employee, I'm glad you're sharing these forward thoughts on software development. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the future of older companies who are late to the reality, and that every company is a software company. And what ways can these companies remain competitive without engineering talent?
That is a great question. This is my job, is to find innovation early and help it make its way into either the public markets as an IPO or having a older company purchase that innovation, right? So it's a long way of saying I'm biased, but one simple way is to buy these innovative startups, right? Integrate them into your companies, incorporate their technology, buy that culture. I'd say something pretty bold. Almost every big product of almost every big tech company you know of was purchased, right? Like Google, every part of Google Office was purchased. Google Docs, Google Sheets, Microsoft bought PowerPoint. I used to work in Cisco's corporate development group, and many Cisco products are purchased. So I think that is a great way, and that turns the cycle of innovation, which pays my salary, it pays entrepreneurs' salaries even when they fail, and then it pays for innovation to come in. I think the spirit of the question was a little bit different though. So I think buying M&A to get innovation is probably not what this person was looking for. Yeah.
That's
I mean, I've
will work.
I think it should happen way more than it does, and that's even if I wasn't working in the industry, if I wasn't a beneficiary of that M&A. But I mean, more broadly, I think there are. I think at Intuit, the CEO of Scott Cook, the CEO of Intuit, was very famously a big proponent of Agile and this notion of building in lightweight fashion very quickly. I think that's an important idea. I suspect that reorienting a whole culture around becoming a software company is very tricky because there's too many folks with entrenched interest wanting to keep it the way that it is. But becoming a software company involves changing your business model from upfront payment to recurring. I can't even imagine the Salesforce implications for that, the sales compensation, all the, and then it involves changing your deployment cycles from multiple years to multiple days. Like that's a massive shift. It involves changing the way that you hire. So I think it's a massive shift. It's worth trying to do elements of this, but I don't have a great answer for that. That's a massive undertaking.
Well, last chance. I don't know. Does anybody in the panel have a question? Okay. Well, thank you so much for doing this.
Great. Well, thanks.
I hope you come back like soon. I think this is great.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, everybody, Kyle, Meredith, Angela, Kristen, Caitlin, I appreciate you all working to help me make this possible. I do hope that if you all got inspired by this talk, drop me a note. I'll put my email address again back in the chat so you have it. If you see anything interesting on the blog, let me know. And most importantly for my business, if you have compelling ideas that you want to discuss or businesses you're starting, I would love to hear about them and even consider investing in them out of Ubiquity Ventures. So again, thank you, Angela. I appreciate it. Sunil Nagaraj with Ubiquity Ventures, and it was great to talk with you today.
Thanks so much, Sunil. Appreciate you.
Cool. Thanks, Kyle.